The clinking of glasses echoes in the air, a sound like brittle ice cracking. It's warm in here, too warm, the air thick with the smell of expensive perfume and achievement. My brother stands beside my father, beaming, the picture of conventional success in his rented cap and gown. Friends and family are gathered, smiling, expectant. This is his moment. This is Alex's moment. My father clears his throat, holding his glass high. His eyes, usually sharp, soften just slightly as they rest on Alex. The air stills. Everyone is watching him. To Alex, my father begins, his voice resonating with pride, who has worked hard, stayed focused, and built a foundation for a truly remarkable future. He pauses, and the pause stretches, filled only by the distant murmur of the city outside. My smile feels painted on, stretched tight across my face. I brace myself. I know it's coming. I always know. He represents, my father continues, his gaze sweeping across the room, landing on me for just a fraction of a second before snapping back to Alex, everything a parent hopes for. Dedication, vision, success. He raises the glass higher, and the smiles around the room widen. People start murmuring their agreement, nodding along. To the only successful child, my father says, his voice ringing with finality, with absolute certainty. May your path continue upward, son. The words hang in the air like smoke. Only successful. The applause crashes around me, a physical force. It's deafening. Everyone is raising their glasses, cheering for Alex, celebrating the success of the only successful child. My own glass is heavy in my hand. The champagne inside feels flat, tastes like ash. The ice around my heart isn't cracking, it's thickening. I can feel the weight of their collective agreement, the silent consensus that yes, Alex is the one who did it right, the one who matters. My smile doesn't break. I lift my glass too, a mechanical motion. I look at Alex. He doesn't look at me. He's basking in the glow, accepting the congratulations, oblivious to the quiet, surgical cut my father just made. Only successful. The phrase lodges itself in my chest, a cold, sharp splinter. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was deliberate. A public declaration. A line drawn in the sand. On one side, Alex, the heir apparent to achievement. On the other, me, the afterthought. The failure. The one who doesn't count. My father's face, flushed with pride and champagne, is a mask I can't penetrate. He means it. He truly believes it. In this room, filled with people who have watched us grow, who know our family story, he has just defined us. And I am defined by absence, by lack, by the success I supposedly do not possess. The party continues, a blur of happy faces and congratulatory words. I nod, I smile, I make polite conversation. But inside, the splinter twists. It's not just the words. It's the context, the celebration, the contrast. Alex's bright future laid out like a red carpet, and mine is just the shadows pooling around the edges of the room. I can feel the eyes on me sometimes, pitying, maybe, or just curious. What about me? What am I doing? The questions aren't asked aloud. Not here, not now, but I can feel them. And my father's words are the answer they already accept. Nothing. Not success. I drain my glass. The cold helps. It dulls the sting just for a second. The music feels too loud now, the laughter too bright. I need air. I need out. But I'm trapped, playing the role of the supportive sibling, the one who isn't the only successful child. Only successful. The echo follows me. It's branded onto the back of my eyelids. I excuse myself, muttering something about needing fresh air. The cool night outside hits me like a shock. I lean against the railing of the balcony, looking out at the city lights spread below. They twinkle like distant, unattainable stars. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Life before that toast wasn't exactly a fairy tale, but it felt possible. Like I was on a path, maybe a winding one, maybe one only I could see, but it was mine. I wasn't chasing the corporate ladder like Alex. My grades were fine, good even, but I didn't have his laser focus on traditional metrics. He interned at the big firms, wore the suits, spoke the language of mergers and acquisitions from the age of 20. I was the kid with the messy desk, the late nights spent coding something nobody understood, sketching ideas for things that didn't exist yet. While Alex was joining the debate club and networking events, I was building crude websites, fiddling with microcontrollers, reading books on design thinking and behavioral economics that had nothing to do with my major. My father saw Alex as a reflection of himself, amplified, disciplined, ambitious in a way he understood, predictable. He'd pat Alex on the back, talk about his potential, introduce him as my son, the future, insert impressive, conventional job title. With me, it was different. A fond, slightly bewildered shake of the head. He's creative, he'd say, the word hanging in the air like a polite apology. Trying to find his way. Finding my way felt less like a journey and more like wandering through a mist only I could see through. My way wasn't linear. It was messy. It involved crashing courses in things I didn't understand, late nights fueled by cheap coffee, explaining my ideas to blank or skeptical faces. My projects weren't tangible like Alex's summer analyst reports. They were lines of code, prototypes that barely worked, business plans scrawled on napkins. I had this idea, a simple one really, but I thought it could change things for people. Connect them in a way that felt more genuine, more human than the platforms already out there. It started small, just a hobby project, something I worked on in my spare time. But the more I built it, the more I believed in it. It felt real to me. More real than any job interview or networking mixer. Alex was starting his high-paying job at a prestigious firm. His life was mapped out, analyst, associate VP, partner maybe. A clear, upward trajectory. Success, defined in bold print on a balance sheet. My path involved maxing out credit cards to pay for server space, learning marketing by trial and error, facing rejection emails that piled up like snowdrifts. My father didn't discourage me, not actively. But he didn't encourage me either. He just didn't see it. It was invisible to him, like a different frequency he couldn't tune into. He'd ask about Alex's bonus, his stock options. He'd ask me if I was still playing around with that computer thing, playing around. Like a child with building blocks, not an adult trying to build a future. I tried to explain it to him once. Sat him down, showed him the prototype, explained the market need, the potential. He listened patiently, nodding. When I finished, he smiled kindly. That's interesting, son. But shouldn't you be focusing on finding a real job? Something stable? Real job. Stable. His definition of success was a cage, albeit a comfortable one. My idea, my passion, was just a distraction from finding the cage. So, I stopped trying to explain. I just worked. In the quiet hours when the world slept, I built. Code, design, strategy. It was slow. It was lonely. There were days I looked at Alex's life, the ease of his path, the clear markers of approval he collected like trophies, and I wondered if my father was right. Maybe I was just playing around. Maybe this dream was just that, a dream, destined to evaporate in the harsh light of reality. The toast, that night at Alex's graduation, wasn't just words. It was the culmination of years of this quiet dismissal, this unspoken comparison. It was the public confirmation of my deepest fear, that in my father's eyes, and perhaps in the eyes of the world he respected, I was fundamentally less capable, less worthy, less successful, only successful. The words echoed not just in the room, but in the silent chambers of my own doubt. They solidified the mist around my path, making it feel less like a journey and more like being lost. That night, the possibility I'd clung to felt like it shattered into a million pieces, scattered by the force of my father's definitive declaration. The days after the toast were thick with a silence that felt heavier than any noise. My father didn't mention it. Alex didn't mention it. Nobody did. It was as if the words, so loud and clear in the moment, had been swallowed by the polite conventions of family life. But they lived inside me, a constant, low hum of inadequacy. I went back to my tiny apartment, the one with the window overlooking a brick wall. My workspace was a corner desk cluttered with wires, monitors, and cold coffee cups. Staring at the code on the screen felt pointless. What was I doing? Building something for who? To what end? The only end my father saw was failure. And his vision felt inescapable now. For weeks, the motivation drained out of me like water from a cracked pot. I'd sit there, the cursor blinking impatiently, but my mind was a blank. My father's voice was louder than any potential customers. Only successful, it poisoned the well of my creativity, my drive. I tried to push through, force myself to work on the code, send out emails to potential investors, friends, anyone who might listen. The rejections came back, polite but firm. Interesting concept, but market not ready. Lack of proven track record. Each one was another echo of the toast. Lack of proven track record. Alex had a track record. He had internships, glowing recommendations, a degree from a good university. I had lines of code, and a father who thought I was playing around. I remember one particularly bad call. A potential investor, a family friend my father had probably put me in touch with as a reluctant favor. He listened for 10 minutes, asked a couple of polite, dismissive questions, and then sighed. "Look," he said, his voice kind but firm. "Your brother Alex. Now, there's a young man going places. He understands the real world. This is nice. But it's not a business. It's a hobby. Your father's right, you know. Maybe it's time to focus on something more tangible." Tangible. The word felt like a physical blow. It wasn't just my father. It was his world. A world that measured success in brick and mortar, in predictable quarterly reports, in the weight of a business card. My world, the digital one, the one of intangible connections and potential networks, was invisible, dismissed as ephemeral, not real. The self-doubt deepened its roots. I started sleeping more, working less. The messy desk became a monument to stalled ambition. I'd scroll through social media, seeing Alex's carefully curated posts, a picture at a corporate event, a mention in a company newsletter, a photo with his perfectly poised girlfriend at a fancy restaurant. His life was a highlight reel of tangible success. Mine felt like a blooper reel of quiet failures. I tried talking to Alex. He was busy, of course, with his new job, his new life. When I finally caught him, I didn't bring up the toast directly. I just tried to articulate the weight I was feeling, the struggle of building something from nothing with no support. He listened, sort of nodded along. "Yeah, man, it's tough starting out," he'd said, probably while checking his work email. "But you gotta hustle, right? Like, put in the hours. Find what works. You should really network more. Go to industry events." He meant well, I think, but he didn't understand. His hustle was within a defined system, with clear rules and rewards. Mine was in the wilderness, trying to clear my own path with a plastic spoon. His advice, while valid in his world, felt utterly useless in mine. He couldn't see the mist I was in. He couldn't feel the weight of our father's words because those words hadn't been aimed at him. They had crowned him. They had buried me. The rejections kept coming. Funding applications denied. Partnerships that fell through at the last minute. Early users who tried the platform and drifted away. Each setback reinforced the narrative my father had laid out. I wasn't capable. I wasn't successful. I was just playing around. The startup wasn't just a project anymore. It was a battleground. And I was losing. Losing not just financially, but emotionally. My confidence was eroding. The passion that had fueled those late nights felt like a dying ember. The world outside my window, the one where Alex thrived, felt increasingly distant and unreachable. My father's toast wasn't just a moment of public humiliation. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy I was actively living out. And the worst part? I was starting to believe it myself. I hit bottom on a Tuesday. I'd gotten an email earlier that day, the final, definitive rejection from the last major investor I'd pinned my hopes on. The tone was polite, almost sympathetic, which somehow made it worse. It wasn't just a no. It was a "we don't believe in you." I sat at my messy desk, the glow of the monitors reflecting in my blank eyes. The apartment felt cold, even though it was midsummer. The air conditioning unit rattled a sad, rhythmic beat. I hadn't showered in 2 days. The smell of stale coffee and failure hung heavy. I opened my online banking app. The numbers were stark, brutal.
Red. Deep red.
Credit cards maxed, savings gone. I had enough money for maybe 2 more weeks' rent if I ate nothing but instant noodles. The server bills were due. If I didn't pay them, everything I'd built, every line of code, every user profile, would be wiped out.
Gone. Just like that.
A digital ghost. I closed the banking app. Opened my photo gallery. There was a picture from Alex's graduation. Alex, beaming. My father, beaming. My mother, looking proud. Me, on the edge of the frame, smiling stiffly. I zoomed in on my father's face as he raised his glass. The certainty in his eyes. The quiet triumph. To the only successful child. The phrase echoed, loud and clear in the silent apartment. It wasn't just a phrase anymore. It felt like a verdict. A life sentence. My father hadn't just voiced an opinion. He had declared my destiny. And he was right.
Look at me. Broke.
Alone. My dreams circling the drain. Alex was moving into his new apartment, getting fitted for expensive suits, talking about his fast-track promotion. I was staring down eviction and the digital equivalent of a graveyard. A wave of something dark and heavy washed over me.
Despair?
Resignation?
It felt deeper than that.
It felt like dissolving, like ceasing to be. If even I, who had poured years into this, was starting to believe his words, then what was the point? What was the fight for? Validation from him? It was never coming. Success by his definition? I didn't want it. But success by any definition felt impossible now. I buried my face in my hands. The weight felt crushing. I wanted to disappear. To just stop. Stop trying, stop failing, stop existing in the state of constant, low-grade humiliation. Then something shifted. Slow, almost imperceptible at first. Like tectonic plates deep beneath the surface. It wasn't a burst of inspiration. It was colder. Harder. It was anger. Not the hot, explosive kind. This was cold, quiet, and deep. It started in my gut and spread like a slow-acting poison. Anger at the investors who couldn't see past their spreadsheets. Anger at Alex, whose effortless climb highlighted my stumble. But mostly anger at my father. Not for not believing in me. I could almost forgive that. But for saying it then. For making it public. For using a moment of celebration to draw a line and deliberately place me on the wrong side of it. For defining me, boxing me in, and then watching, perhaps even expecting, me to fulfill his prediction. Only successful. The words came back, but this time, they didn't sound like a verdict. They sounded like a challenge.
Adare.
He had thrown down the gauntlet. He had written my story. But it wasn't over yet. In that moment, sitting in the cold, silent apartment, staring at the ghost of my project on the screens and the ghost of my father's words in my mind, something inside me snapped. Not broke. Snapped into place. This wasn't about proving him wrong anymore. Not entirely. It was about proving myself right. About refusing to let his limited view become my reality. About taking that word, successful, and ripping it out of his definition, forging my own. The despair didn't vanish, but the anger banked it, solidified it into something else. Resolve. A fierce, quiet, absolute determination. If he wanted to write me off, fine. Let him. Let them all. But I wasn't going to lie down and die just to make his prophecy neat and tidy. I lifted my head. My eyes burned. The messy desk, the blinking cursor, the looming bills, they didn't look like markers of failure anymore. They looked like obstacles. Obstacles I had to overcome. I didn't have a sudden surge of energy. I didn't feel hopeful. What I felt was cold, calm, and incredibly clear. There was only one way forward. Through the mist. through the rejections, through the doubt, through his words. I reached for my keyboard. My fingers, which had felt clumsy and useless for weeks, felt steady now. There was still time, barely. 2 weeks. Just enough to try one last, desperate thing. An idea that had been lurking in the back of my mind, too risky, too unconventional. But conventional hadn't worked. Stability wasn't an option. My father's path wasn't my path. This was my turning point, born not of inspiration, but of defiance. Not of hope, but of cold, hard anger. He had called me unsuccessful. I would show him the cost of that judgment. I would take his words, grind them into dust, and build something new on the foundation of his dismissal. The quiet hum in my chest wasn't inadequacy anymore. It was the sound of a furnace being stoked. The idea that had been too risky, too unconventional, was now my only option. It involved a complete pivot, focusing on a niche segment of the market I'd initially dismissed as too small. It meant tearing down half the code I'd written and rebuilding it from scratch. It meant late nights that bled into early mornings, fueled by sheer, stubborn refusal to quit. I stopped answering calls I knew were from family. Stopped checking social media. The outside world, the one where Alex was climbing his ladder, ceased to exist for me. My world shrank to the size of my apartment, the glow of my screens, the rhythmic clicking of my keyboard, and the constant, low thrum of determination in my chest. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Food was whatever I could grab quickly. My body ached, my eyes burned, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. There was no room for doubt anymore, only the relentless pursuit of this one last chance. I was running on fumes and pure spite. Every bug I fixed, every line of code I wrote, was a quiet act of defiance against my father's toast. Only successful, the words were a whip, driving me forward. The new version of the platform took shape, leaner, more focused. It wasn't elegant, not yet. It was functional. It did one thing, but it did it well, better than anything else out there for this specific niche. I poured every ounce of energy I had into it, pushing myself past physical and mental limits I didn't know I had. The rent was due in a week. Then 5 days. 3. I didn't have it. I maxed out another obscure credit card I'd forgotten about, paid the server bill, bought a week's worth of instant noodles. That was it. The absolute end of the line. If this didn't work, I was done. Evicted.
Broke.
Proving him right in the most humiliating way possible. I launched the new version quietly. No fanfare, no press releases. Just a few posts in online forums, reaching out to the specific community I was targeting. Then I waited. The first few days were agonizingly slow. A trickle of new users. A few comments. Mostly silence. The doubt, which I'd held at bay with sheer force of will, started to creep back in. Had I been wrong? Was this just another dead end? Was he right all along? I sat there, watching the user numbers barely budge, the minutes ticking by like hours. The deadline for the next rent payment loomed. The instant noodles tasted like cardboard. I felt the familiar weight of despair beginning to settle back in. Then a surge. Small at first, then growing. Mentions in the forums I hadn't posted in. Users inviting others. Organic growth. They weren't just signing up, they were using the platform.
They were talking about it.
Enthusiastically. It was working. The niche, dismissed by the experts, was real. And my focused, unconventional approach was connecting with them. The growth accelerated. From dozens to hundreds, then thousands, in days. The server started straining under the load. I scrambled to upgrade, begging the hosting company for a few days' grace, promising payment. I was still broke, still living on noodles, but now there was a different kind of pressure. Not the pressure of failure, but the terrifying pressure of potential success. Word spread beyond the initial niche. Early adopters, influencers in related communities, started talking about it. Articles appeared on small blogs, then larger tech news sites. They called it innovative, disruptive. Phrases I'd only dared to whisper to myself in the dark of my apartment. I was a blur of activity, fixing bugs, adding features, responding to user feedback. The days and nights merged into one continuous push. I wasn't sleeping, but I wasn't tired in the same way anymore. The exhaustion was real, but it was overlaid with a frantic, exhilarating energy. Then came the email. Subject line: interview request, major national news network. I stared at it, uncomprehending. A national news network? Why? It turned out one of their tech reporters had stumbled upon the platform, seen the buzz, been intrigued by the rapid, organic growth, and wanted to feature it as a segment on their morning show. A segment about unexpected innovation, the little guy disrupting the big players. I read the email 3 times. It felt unreal. National TV. My little idea, born from late-night coding sessions and fueled by a father's dismissal, was going to be on national television. The timing was perfect. Or maybe it was fate. The segment was scheduled for the following Monday. My rent was due Friday. I still didn't have it, not quite, but there were murmurs now. Small checks from early monetization efforts, promises of investment calls after the segment aired. It was a gamble, but it felt like the universe was finally tipping the scales. I agreed to the interview. They wanted to film in my workspace, my messy apartment corner. I tried to tidy up, but there was only so much I could do.
It was what it was.
The reality of the struggle. The film crew arrived, polite, professional, a stark contrast to the chaos of my life. They set up lights, cameras, made me explain what I did, why I built it. I talked about connection, about community, about building something real in a digital world. I didn't mention my father. I didn't mention the toast. But every word I spoke felt like a silent answer to his dismissal. When they left, the apartment felt strangely empty, quiet. It was done. The segment was recorded. It would air in a few days. The die was cast. I spent the next few days in a fever dream of work and anticipation. The server was holding up, barely. The user numbers kept climbing. The buzz was growing louder. Monday morning arrived. I was in a cheap motel room outside the city. I'd had to leave the apartment, couldn't afford the next month's rent while I waited for potential investment to materialize. I was crashing there before heading to a prearranged meeting later that day. The room was sterile, impersonal, a far cry from the polished boardrooms Alex was used to. I turned on the television, flipped through the channels until I found the news network. The morning show was in full swing. News anchors chatting, clips rolling. My heart was pounding. The segment was scheduled for later in the hour. I waited, watching the mundane flow of morning news, traffic reports, weather forecasts, celebrity gossip. It felt surreal that my life, my struggle, my quiet rebellion was about to interrupt this carefully orchestrated normalcy. Then, the anchor introduced the segment. And now, something a little different. Our tech reporter, Sarah Chen, found a fascinating story of innovation happening in the most unexpected of places. A young entrepreneur building something disruptive from the ground up. Sarah? The screen cut to Sarah Chen, standing. Yes, standing in my apartment. At my messy desk. Seeing it on TV felt like an out-of-body experience. She started talking, her voice calm and professional, describing the platform, its unique approach, the incredible user growth. They showed screenshots. My design. My work. They showed the interview footage of me, sitting there, talking about my vision. I looked tired. My clothes were just okay. My apartment looked like a struggle. But my voice sounded clear. Passionate. Determined. Sarah Chen wrapped up the segment, smiling. A truly inspiring story of persistence and vision, she said. Proving that sometimes, the biggest ideas come from the most humble beginnings. She turned back to the main anchors. So, what do you think, David, Maria? Could this be the next big thing? David, the male anchor, chuckled. Well, it certainly has people talking, Sarah. Amazing growth numbers from what looks like a very small operation. Maria, the female anchor, nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely fascinating. The market clearly wanted something like this. Definitely one to watch.
They moved on to the next story. Just like that.
A few minutes of airtime, and it was over. But for me, Everything had just changed. I sat there on the edge of the motel bed, the remote control clutched in my hand. The TV was showing a commercial for breakfast cereal, bright and cheerful. But the image of my messy desk, my face, my platform, being discussed by national news anchors was seared into my mind.
My phone rang.
I jumped. It was Alex. I answered. His voice was hesitant, almost awestruck.
Whoa, he said. Dude.
I just saw you on TV. The news. National news. Yeah, I managed. My voice felt shaky. That's incredible, he said. I had no idea. That platform, it looked huge. Huge. Not playing around. Not a hobby. Huge. He fumbled for words, clearly trying to process it. He asked a few questions about the platform, the growth, sounding genuinely impressed, maybe a little envious. Then he paused.
Took a breath.
Dad's watching too, Alex said, his voice lower now. He called me, asking if I saw it. He sounded, I don't know.
Stunned.
He just kept saying, Is that on television? I closed my eyes. I could see him, my father, sitting in his living room, the morning news on, seeing my face, seeing my messy apartment workspace presented as the birthplace of innovation. Hearing the anchors call it disruptive, a big thing, one to watch. The words from the toast came rushing back. To the only successful child. And here I was. Not just successful, but visibly, undeniably successful, on a stage far larger than any graduation party. My success wasn't measured in a predictable salary or a corporate title. It was measured in rapid growth, in national attention, in the sheer, undeniable buzz that surrounded what I had built. He had defined success so narrowly, so conventionally. He had looked at his two sons, seen one following the approved path, and declared him the winner, the only winner. He had dismissed my path, my vision, as something less, something insignificant. And now his definition of success felt small, provincial, almost quaint, compared to the swirling, unpredictable, massive potential of what I had created. He hadn't just been wrong, he had been spectacularly, publicly wrong. And his younger son, the one he had declared unsuccessful, had just blindsided him by winning on a playing field he didn't even understand, with rules he hadn't set. The phone was quiet for a moment. Alex was probably listening to something his wife was saying in the background. I picture my father, sitting there, the TV still on, the cereal commercial playing. The triumphant smile he'd worn at the toast, replaced by shock, confusion, maybe even a dawning realization. The victory wasn't just being on TV. It was seeing or imagining the look on his face. The gasp Alex described. The moment his carefully constructed narrative about his sons, about success, about me, crumbled. It wasn't just karma. It was a targeted, devastating blow delivered by the very person he had dismissed. I hadn't just won. I had rewritten the script he'd tried to impose. Alex cleared his throat.
He wants to talk to you, he said. Dad.
He sounds pretty shaken up. I didn't answer immediately. I looked around the sterile motel room. It wasn't a palace. I wasn't suddenly a millionaire, not yet anyway. The struggle was far from over. But I had done it. I had faced the doubt, the rejections, the crushing weight of dismissal, and I had built something real, something that mattered, something that couldn't be ignored. My father's words had tried to shrink my world. My work had just exploded it onto a national stage. Yeah, I said finally, my voice steady.
Tell him.
Tell him I'll call him back later. I'm kind of busy right now.
Busy.
Building.
Succeeding.
On my own terms. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. Alex understood. Maybe for the first time. I hung up. The television still chattered on. The commercial ended, and a host was laughing. The world outside the motel room was continuing as normal. But my world had irrevocably shifted. It wasn't just about the startup anymore. It was about reclaiming my own story. About proving that success wasn't a single, narrow path defined by someone else, but a vast, wild landscape you forge yourself. My father's toast had been a moment of public judgment. My appearance on national television was a moment of public vindication. And the sweet irony was that he had been there to witness both. Blindsided by the very unsuccessful child he had so confidently dismissed. The satisfaction was cold, quiet, and deep. It wasn't a roar of triumph, but a low, steady hum. The sound of a different kind of engine. The sound of a different kind of success. Mine. The calls came flooding in after that. Investors who had rejected me before were now eager to talk. Partnership opportunities appeared out of nowhere. The user growth numbers spiked again. The pace of life accelerated to a dizzying speed. Amidst the whirlwind, there was the quiet space left by the father-son dynamic. My father did call. He didn't sound like the man who had made that toast. He sounded small, uncertain. He fumbled for words, offered congratulations that felt forced, tried to ask about the business in a way that showed he still didn't really grasp it. There was no apology for the toast. Not directly. Maybe he didn't even realize the depth of the wound he had inflicted, or maybe he did, and couldn't bring himself to acknowledge it. He just skirted around it, talking about how proud he was, how he'd always known I had it in me, a blatant rewriting of history that was almost comical. I didn't confront him. What was the point? The national television segment had been the confrontation. It had been the answer to his toast, delivered not with words, but with undeniable reality. His dismissal had been public, my vindication was public. That was the victory. The relationship with my father is different now. It's not repaired. The words he spoke that night can't be unsaid. They are still there, a scar on the landscape of our history. But the dynamic has shifted. The power has shifted. He no longer holds the sole definition of success. He no longer holds the power to diminish me with a phrase. Alex was genuinely impressed. He still doesn't fully understand what I do, but he respects it. Our sibling rivalry, fueled for years by our father's favoritism, seems to have dissipated. We're on different paths, walking different landscapes, but there's a quiet understanding now. The startup grew rapidly. It faced new challenges, new pressures, but they were the problems of growth, not the crushing weight of existential failure. I built a team, moved into a real office, though I kept the messy desk set up in a corner, a reminder. The ramen noodle days were over. But the memory of that toast, of the cold words, only successful, remains. It's not a source of pain anymore, not usually. It's a reminder of where I came from, of the doubt I overcame, of the fire that was ignited by dismissal. Success, I learned, isn't about proving anyone wrong. Not really. It's about proving yourself right. About building something because you believe in it, even when no one else does. Especially when the person whose opinion you craved the most dismisses you entirely. My father's toast was meant to define me by my perceived lack. Instead, it became the catalyst that drove me to build something so undeniable, so visible, that it shattered his definition entirely. He raised a glass to the only successful child, never imagining that the one he left out of the toast would become successful on a scale that would make his world gasp. The sting of those words faded, replaced by a quiet strength. I didn't need his validation anymore. I had built my own, and that, I realized, was the greatest success of all. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.